It's often said the worst time of year in Japan is summer, but this is false. Once upon a time, in one of my early years living here, I was tucked up fast asleep in my bed, when all of a sudden I heard some ominous shouting. It was coming from a speaker outside my apartment window, and it was borderline deafening. Now, this was not long after the Tohoku disaster, and I thought maybe something else bad was about to happen, right? Like some kind of early warning system. And as my Japanese was pretty basic at the time, I couldn't make out what was being said. And so I arose eloquently from my futon, stumbled over to the window, and peered outside. And there on the road was a little truck, plastered with half a dozen banners, and a man and a woman precariously on the roof, waving gleefully and shouting all the while. And I realised to my absolute horror that I'd been rudely awoken for politics. Bloody politics. Nobody deserves that. Nobody. Vote for Takeshi. Vote for Satoshi. Vote for them. Love them. And in the days ahead, I heard it every single day, not just from one truck, but half a dozen different trucks, all with different political campaigns, all with different political candidates. The noise got so bad that I practically had to smother myself with a pillow to make it physically inaudible. Above all though, it just didn't make sense. In a country where public transport is tantamount to a moving library, it felt like a bit of a contradiction. And honestly, if a British politician tried this, it really wouldn't end well. Because you would know that is the politician you don't want to vote for. The one that annoys you, the one that makes the noise.
I'll make your life better, I swear. Vote for me. Vote for me now. Do it or you'll regret it.
So I asked around to discover how this was a thing. And it turns out these trucks are called gaisensha, propaganda trucks. And one reason they're popular is Japan has some pretty strict rules when it comes to political campaigning. For example, door knocking isn't allowed. Campaigns are only allowed to have 70,000 leaflets. TV ads promoting individual candidates are restricted. Only political parties can promote themselves. And so the aim of the sound truck is essentially to drum the name of the candidate into your head, and in some respects remind people in Japan that politics even exists, because voter turnout is amongst the lowest in the world. In the 2024 election, just 53% of the population voted, compared to 60% in the UK and 63% in the US respectively. But the trucks essentially mean the more political instability, the more hard of hearing you become. And so today I want to share with you 12 things about Japan that don't make sense, at least on the surface. Because for me, the most interesting part is understanding the why behind everything, right? And now you know why, above all, to stay the hell away from Japan during election season. So my new hobby this year has been collecting records of my favourite artists. Artists like Tatsuro Yamashita, king of city pop, Hall & Oates, legends of the 80s, and of course the Smiths, back when Morrissey was good. And you know, one of the most important things a band can do is think of their name, because it becomes like a statement, doesn't it? You know, I'm thinking bands like the Spice Girls, they're in-your-face, rebellious, all about girl power. The Backstreet Boys, bad boys, hiding in the shadows, rebels. New Kids on the Block, out with the old, in with the next generation. There's a sort of statement or message going on there underneath those names. Now let's do that with Japanese artists. Artists like Bump of Chicken. They like chicken. Maximum the Hormone. They are the next one. Crispy Camera Club. It sounds like when you get like crisps all over the camera, and which I have done. 17 years old and Berlin Wall. Oh, it just sounds like a historic experience. Touch My Secret. Yeah, it doesn't sound very good, does it? Yeah. In the same way we see Japanese English marketing on numerous products here to add a sense of prestige, but often it goes wrong because it doesn't make sense. You see a similar thing with bands, and having a quirky band name is a great way to stand out. And often if you read into why these bands chose the name, there isn't much logic behind it. Take Maximum the Hormone, for example. To quote them on why they chose that name, take it as you like, it means anything, from the Japanese cuisine for cooking animal innards to the sensation of the maximum amount of your hormones coming to the boil. Doesn't really explain much. It's almost like they just went to a dictionary of English words and just sort of picked them out randomly. But these band names are written in katakana, and use a lot of foreign borrowed words, right? And they sound better in Japanese. For example, Bump of Chicken is Bumper of the Chicken, which is often just shortened to Bumper. Sounds kind of cool. Maximum the Hormone is Maximum the Hormone, Like phonetically, these band names sound kind of cool. And I think that is where the band names are emphasized, on sounding good phonetically rather than having any implicit meaning. And many artists here don't have to worry about going international. People just want to focus on the domestic Japanese music market. So they don't need to worry about having an embarrassing or slightly odd connotation overseas. And honestly, when you think of half the bland, boring, rubbish band names we have in the West, like Westlife, Little Mix, Five, absolutely boring. Give me Bump of Chicken and Crispy Camera Club any day of the week. One of the greatest pleasures in life is walking into a car showroom, picking out a car and buying it there and then, driving it home, wind in your hair. That's the personification of freedom right there. And in Japan, you can't do that. You can't have your freedom. Because when you buy a car here, and I'm not making this up, you have to prove that you have a car parking space by sending the local police round to measure it with a tape measure and report back to the car seller that you do indeed have a space. I'm not making this up, this is a real rule, a real thing. It's called a shako shome, and without it, you ain't getting a car. Now there are some exceptions, most notably K cars are exempt from this, which is why on a whim I was able to go and buy it last year and ride off into the sunset, just because K cars are smaller. And the second exemption is in some rural areas in the countryside where it doesn't really matter if you have a car parking space or not. But Japan takes parking very seriously because it kind of needs to, if you look at just how damn dense a typical Japanese city is. Like, I didn't realise until I went back to the UK just how fucking chaotic and messy British roads are, with cars draped along the roadside practically like decoration. Whereas in Japan, every car has its space, either tucked away in a driveway or in a car park. But it's a consequence of modern living and very dense urban spaces, and it kind of makes sense at the end of the day. The price of freedom, unfortunately. But what is freedom? That's a different video, I'll do that next year. There's a moment of dread that comes with staying in any Japanese hotel room. You'll check in, it'll be wonderful, the staff will be lovely, you'll get to your room, you may have a futon, you may have a bed, it doesn't matter, they're both brilliant. But there is one thing that can derail any experience when you discover this, the beanbag pillow. The Sobagara buckwheat pillow, designed to do one thing and one thing alone. Absolutely fuck your neck in 3 different directions. As somebody who spends half their life on the road, staying in various hotels around Japan, this is the difference between a good and a bad night's sleep. And it is often a complaint that I find amongst fellow foreign travellers. Now, they are supposed to have some positive aspects. I think they're it's nice and compact, it's small. They're also said to be nice in summer because they kind of increase airflow in those hot, humid months. And I suppose if we're really clutching at straws, or buckwheat in this case, it kind of continues that nice, natural aesthetic of being in a Japanese environment with the paper sliding doors, the tatami straw mats, the buckwheat husks harvested from the fields. It all adds up to a nice, natural, relaxing aesthetic and atmosphere. Except it doesn't, because it'll break your neck. On your travels around Japan, you'll often get caught up with roadworks, and when you do so, you'll notice that Darth Vader himself is standing there with his red lightsaber out more often than not. Or when you often enter a car park, there seems to be a lot of people telling you where to go and what to do. Far more people than there ever has any right to be. I mean, it's not that hard to park a car, right? Well, I suppose it depends who the driver is. After all, some people have more difficulty than others. But I remember at school we studied American history, and, you know, much of America remains an enigma to me. Things like meatloaf, eggnog, Chuck E. Cheese. I still haven't worked out what the hell that is, and I'm not sure I'm ready to know yet. But we learned about 1930s America. The country had just imploded, unemployment was running rampant, and to try and keep unemployment down, the government started hiring people for lots of wacky and slightly odd jobs that didn't really make much sense, or had almost no value in the grand scheme of things. For example, standing in the street holding balloons, trying to keep the birds away from making a mess on buildings. It was all about stimulating the economy, right? Getting people out there, keeping unemployment down and maintaining that social order. And Japan operates in a very similar way. The country has an amazing track record when it comes to unemployment. And a big part of that are the menial jobs people undertake as a result. Now, you could argue having lots of workers working around a roadwork site isn't such a bad thing, and yet you know it can be automated, you know. But by keeping people in these jobs, it keeps unemployment down, and you find that Japan always prioritises kind of social harmony over profit, and I think that's quite a nice thing. It's a little bit socialist in some regards, but it seems to have worked for the most part, apart from the massive public debt, but that's a story for another day. Now, one thing that doesn't make sense is using the internet without secure access, and that is where today's sponsor, ExpressVPN, comes in. ExpressVPN is an app that encrypts and reroutes your internet traffic through secure servers. You probably already know that using a VPN keeps you safe on public Wi-Fi and keeps your sneaky internet service provider from knowing what you're up to online. But that's not all it does. Admittedly, the first few times I used ExpressVPN was when I needed to access websites back home in the UK that were actually blocked in Japan. I was able to get around it with just 2 clicks. But ExpressVPN is not all about security, it's also got some fun. For example, did you know, with multiple streaming subscriptions from Netflix to Disney, streaming services have different shows in each and every country, and by changing locations, you'll be able to access thousands of extra shows that you won't normally be able to get in your own country. For example, Studio Ghibli films can't actually be watched in Japan on Netflix, but thanks to ExpressVPN, switch to the UK, refresh, and away you go. It's hello Miyazaki all the way. No need to pay for multiple streaming services, just use ExpressVPN to squeeze the most value out of your streaming subscriptions. But ExpressVPN is super easy to use. You can use it on up to 8 different devices, your TV, your phone, your laptop, and best of all, you can find out how to get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/abroad in Japan, or click on the link in the description box below. And don't let annoying regional internet get in your way. I recently had a friend visit here in Tokyo, and they stayed at a hotel that seemed to be quite focused on foreign tourists. And in the morning they had a fine banquet, a breakfast of eggs, bacon, sausage, toast, you know, the works. But my friend isn't really a fan of bacon, and they asked, oh, can I have another egg instead? You know, not an uncommon request, right? And the Japanese waitress looked at her with a sort of perplexed expression and said in English, "It is impossible," which sort of threw my friend off, partly because of the aggressive tone, but mostly because in a country famed for treating the customer as a god, it somewhat felt at odds with that philosophy, right? Well, customer service in Japan is second to none, there is no doubt. A lot of aspects of it are fairly rigid and fairly inflexible. Most notably when it comes to food, like standardization, efficiency, uniformity, quality control, are things that always trump kind of personalization when it comes to the Japanese dining experience. And I really don't think that that is a bad thing. For example, many people love the ramen chain Ichiran because you can customize the ramen in several thousand different ways, different sauces, different spices, levels of garlic. But I think many Japanese people wouldn't see that as 1,000 different ways to customize their dish, but instead 1,000 different ways to fuck up a perfectly good bowl of ramen. And I agree with that. I don't want to personalize the ramen. I want it the best possible way, where the chef knows the right balance between the ingredients and the flavors to get it right. And that's why we have expressions like omakase, I'll leave it up to you, I'll let you decide. The chef always knows best. So that's kind of why customization isn't such a big thing in Japan compared to the West, and why it can be a little bit awkward when you choose to go off script in certain situations.
It is impossible.
A few years ago, I was doing a live show with Natsuki, and one of the viewers asked him the all-important question: what would you do, Natsuki, if you were Prime Minister? What policies would you implement? Wow. And he thought for a moment before saying, and this is absolutely true, if I were Prime Minister, I'd give everybody a souvenir jumper. Isn't that lovely? A souvenir jumper. Jumpers for 125 million people. I want to live in a world where leaders implement policies like that. But in some respects, as well as being thoughtful, it was rather pragmatic, because in Japan, there's no bloody central heating. Japan has given the world robots, bullet trains and Walkman, but for the most part, paradoxically, there is no central heating, there are no radiators. Now, the country does have localised kind of heating devices like kotatsu tables, which I won't deny are very cosy and fun to sit under during winter, although I also won't deny I would just rather have a warm room than a table that's hot and everything else cold. But if you live in the Japanese countryside, you get used to the scent of kerosene heaters very quickly indeed. They do heat up the room fast, but they are very dry, and they will give you a little bit of a headache. But also this year, when Connor and I stayed in the ryokan, the traditional inn, without electricity, we at least had kerosene heaters to stop us from freezing to death. So why doesn't Japan have water-based central heating systems like radiators, you know? And the truth is, using heating systems that rely on wall-embedded pipes in a country that is the most seismically active nation on Earth equals bad results. After all, one bad earthquake and your entire house might turn into a fucking swimming pool, as we found with the studio back in 2022 when an earthquake burst a pipe above and led to the flooding of our beloved ramen shop. Thank God none of the water managed to reach the electricity. Things could have been a hell of a lot worse. Beyond that though, the nature of Japanese homes is to keep them cool and well ventilated in summer for the most part. And Hokkaido, which is vastly colder, does have central heating and is better equipped than the rest of the country, and Lord knows it needs to be because it's fucking cold up there. Once upon a time I was a teacher, and I remember one of the fondest parts of my day was having a little quiet lunch at my desk. It was typically around 1:30 in the afternoon, and nearly every single teacher in the room ordered their bento from a local shop. And they came in these red boxes, and you'd open it, and there would be your lunch for the day, and it would change from Monday through to Friday. In the second year, I got quite conscious about my health after a devastating health report and a doctor complaining about how awful I was. And in order to get fit, I decided to pretty much cut out rice, or to eat a lot less rice than I had been in the first year. And I would eat maybe half the rice and then close the box and leave it. And when you were done, you would pile them up with all the other staff lunch boxes in the corner of the room, and somebody would come in and collect them. Now, after a few weeks of not eating half the rice, one day a member of staff, awesome lady who used to sort of manage the staff room, came over and was like, "Oh, Chris-san, do you not eat your rice?" And I was like, no, yes, maybe. And she said, "In Japan, we don't waste food. Motai nai, Chris-san. Motai nai." And I was like, "Motai nai, what's that?" Turns out, motai nai meant don't waste things. I apologised for wasting the rice, and I never ordered the rice again. And I kind of understand why. You know, it's wrong to waste food, and it's wrong to waste rice. And yet what doesn't make sense in terms of wastage is the sheer amount of packaging that most products come in. Whether it's individually wrapped bananas, or sweets wrapped in plastic, then placed in more plastic like a fucking Russian Fabergé egg. Japan does have an unhealthy addiction to plastic, so motai nai, but let's try and do that with plastic as well. Typically it comes down to the beautification of products. People like to present such things, particularly sweets, as gifts, as presents, right? And they like them gift wrapped. And I understand the hygiene aspects of wrapping an individual banana, but still it is a bit wasteful, and it is at odds with the motai nai culture that is so ruthlessly enforced. You know, as somebody who has nostalgia for the 1990s, as you probably guessed from my comments about the Backstreet Boys earlier, I love Japanese websites because it is essentially like going back 25 years. Most people associate Japanese aesthetics with minimalism, and yet when you look at a website, it's very much a maximalist approach. Text everywhere, an onslaught of content, often fairly overwhelming. But Japan always seemed very far behind when it came to software. There's lots of reasons behind this. In the 90s, most coding was in the English language. The Japanese language sort of fell by the wayside a little bit. And also in the early 2000s, Japan was at the cutting edge on mobile internet, right? People had phones with internet on long before we did over in the UK, leading to the rise of Galapagos phones. You find websites prioritise function over form. Really, it is just a different design aesthetic. In the same way Japanese TVs are plastered with text, right? And it looks completely different from TV shows in the West. So these days, it's not that the software is behind or programming is behind per se, it is a design choice designed to appeal to Japanese consumers. Overloaded content gets the job done. We've all had that nightmare moment, walking into a Japanese service station bathroom, crashing open the door, and discovering that it is a squat toilet, not a good toilet, and all the bells and whistles of the futuristic experience we're meant to believe encompasses each and every Japanese toilet. It is perhaps the greatest enigma, so why are they popular? And there's a few reasons, but first and foremost, a lot of people like them because they've been around longer, and older generations tend to have I wouldn't say an affection for squat toilets, but they have used them for decades and they don't want to switch to another kind of toilet. But there are health benefits from squatting, right, as opposed to sitting, and there can be no doubt about that. Studies have shown squatting is good for you. As well as that, there are hygiene benefits on paper because your body is not touching or coming into contact with any part of the toilet, and again, some people prefer that. I actually don't think it's more hygienic personally from my experience travelling around the country and from what I've witnessed, but anyway. And finally, it is good for space efficiency. A lot of places are quite small, and you see them more in older buildings from the 60s and 70s where there is quite a small space and squat toilets can fit in. But the good news is they're mostly disappearing, and that is something to be celebrated. It really, really is. On one of my first trips to Sapporo, Natsuki and I were in Sapporo Tower. Beautiful tower, great views of the city, highly recommend it. And while we were on our way down, we came face to face with a rather horrifying sight. No, it wasn't my reflection. It was Meron Kuma, literally melon bear.
It's melon bear.
Dental. Human dental. It swings.
Human teeth.
Human teeth.
At what point did somebody think that was like an appropriate mascot? A local Hokkaido bear that had bitten into a juicy Ubari melon had become the ferociously bizarre creature we know and love today. And for me, that triggered something of a fascination with Japanese mascots, a fascination that took me all the way to Kumamoto, where I saw Kumamon the bear, whose sales have been worth an estimated $1 billion to the Japanese economy. And it led me down a path of discovery when it came to Japanese mascots, whether it's Clock Tower Scary Man or a stupid runway. In the early 2010s, nearly every single place in Japan started implementing mascots. Why? Why does everything need a mascot? And it turns out Kumamon the bear is the answer. Created in 2010 to attract tourists to Kumamoto Prefecture, Kumamon became nationally popular. And in just 2 years, Kumamon went on to generate $1.2 billion in economic benefits for the region, from tourism and product sales to the sheer high levels of publicity. And that is what triggered this kind of onslaught of mascot characters throughout Japan. Everybody wanted a piece of the action, everybody wanted their very own Kumamon. And to this day, nobody has come close. Kumamon still reigns supreme. In a country famed for its innovation and high quality output, why does everybody work such long hours? Why is everybody so damn unproductive? Compare Japan to the US, and it's perfectly clear that output is a lot lower here. FaceTime culture is a really big deal, you know, showing that you are at work, showing you are part of the team, you are present, you're in the moment there with everyone, is more important than necessarily doing a good job outright and being productive. I remember when I used to sit at my desk long after work was finished, maybe I was doing a bit of work, maybe I was just studying something. I would always have staff come over and compliment me for being a great worker. And it didn't go unnoticed, you know. It felt like, oh God, does that mean I should stay more often? Does that mean I should do longer hours? If I had been in a job where I could get promoted, that would definitely have tied into my psychology. I would have certainly never gone home because I would have wanted a promotion just by being present. And the people that do go home early are definitely noted down in the mind of the supervisor. There's also Japan's lifetime employment system, Shushin Koyo, whereby somebody who enters a company is said to be able to work there until their dying days, right? It's a job for life, although it is becoming less and less these days. But it means being a poor performer at work doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be dismissed. Know that if you ever get a job in Japan, do stay late. If you want that promotion, it's sort of a prerequisite to doing well in your job, unfortunately. So there we have it, 12 things about Japan that don't make sense until they sort of do. But what did I miss? Let me know down in the comments below, and I think this remains the greatest enigma for me. I know I explained it, I know I tried to comprehend it, but nothing about the beanbag pile makes sense to me. As always though guys, many thanks for watching Abroad in Japan. As for me, I'm off to listen to Bump of Chicken and burn this goddamn beanbag in a field. See you later.